If you'd like to support this podcast, you can do so by visiting kriskarl.com/podcast, where you'll find links to both Patreon and PayPal, where you can make donations. Any and all support is massively appreciated, and a huge thank you to everyone that has supported thus far. So this is the first podcast that's been recorded post-vaccination. I had my second shot yesterday, which I'm not feeling any ill effects from, which I'm actually quite relieved about because I'm super excited about today's episode. We've been trying to line up schedules for a little while. We've finally done it. Pip, firstly, what a fantastic name. But let's talk about how you first got into photography. What made you pick up a camera for the first time?
Well, first of all, congratulations on your vaccine. That's very good.
Thank you.
Second of all, apologies for how long this has taken. I know there's been a lot of rescheduling and building work at my house and that kind of thing that has delayed things. So thrilled to be here. So thank you. In answer to your question, almost by a process of elimination. I think when I was young, like a young teenager, I loved art, I loved painting, drawing, things like that. And I was quite good at it, but I was incredibly slow and got quite frustrated with it.
Right.
And I also loved films. I grew up in the north of England and, watched Ken Loach films and Shane Meadows films and just loved that kind of like social realism, that drama, and loved all that gritty imagery that went with it. So, and obviously making films, very expensive. Back then it was pre-iPhones and all that kind of stuff and sort of pre-digital revolution in video, really. Yep. So that meant I couldn't really make films either, and I was too slow at painting and drawing. So I almost arrived at photography as that kind of like middle ground. I was able to explore cinematic imagery and, get that sort of side of my artistic expression out there. But I also could get the results relatively quickly compared to painting or drawing,
right.
So I sort of found it, sort of sitting in the middle of two things that I really, really enjoyed. It was kind of a process of elimination, really. But then there was also this very bizarre period after that where I must have been about 17 or so, where I had decided that I wanted to be a photographer, but I didn't actually have a camera. I decided that this is a good thing to do. And I felt like I was a photographer, but I had no money. I didn't have a camera. There was no story of like a granddad that gave me an old 35mm camera or anything like that. So I got a job in a factory that was like next to my house and worked at horrible shifts on minimum wage until I could buy my first camera myself. But it was funny because that period, when I didn't have a camera, I felt like I was learning a lot. When I was saving towards getting my first camera, I was actually learning a lot, like reading up on the kind of theory, the science of it, thinking about what I wanted to shoot and just looking at like magazines and other people's photographs and going like, I don't like that. Why don't I like that? They've composed that picture weirdly, or they've lit that weirdly. Like, I think I could do better than that, or I would do it differently. So, in that period where I was actually saving for a camera, I felt like I was learning the theory. And then when I actually finally got my first camera, then I was pretty unstoppable at that point because I was just straight out the gate shooting as much as possible.
Well, because we're there, we'll jump in at the deep end on a deep question. But
go on.
So you obviously took that time that you weren't out shooting, you weren't obsessed with gear like a lot of people are when they start photography, and you had an opportunity to, like you said, look at the theory and develop, I think, probably the most understated skill possible, which is to develop taste. Do you think that that's probably a major problem with how democratized photography is now? Is that people just, because they can get the camera so easily, they can go out and take pictures so easily, they don't take time to actually find out what they like and to learn the theory?
Yeah, potentially. I think that's the problem with the kind of this digital generation and the sort of social media generation and the sort of like culture of filters and things like that. The taste is almost like pre-packaged, almost like you're sort of sold it in a way.
Right.
So yeah, I do agree with that. I think, and the gear thing, I mean, I've never been interested in gear. Like, I'm 12, 13 years into my career now, and I'm still I'm not interested in gear at all, really.
Right.
And I never was back then at all. I was always about the end result, and it didn't matter what camera I was using or what process. I just liked having the final image and going, I like that. That represents me and my taste. So yeah, I think there is a bit of a problem with that. I think, the digital like phone pictures, that kind of thing, anyone can be a photographer, but I don't think that many people study. I don't mean study in a sort of like academic sense, but just like look at images of like legends and great photographers and, artists, people producing like really special, unique work and like learning from that just literally by looking at it. I think people do a lot less of that. So yeah, I think that can be a bit of a problem.
But also looking from where you ended up. So you kind of, like you said, you landed on photography as a medium between two other art forms. Do you think that there's a lot of benefit to looking for inspiration outside of photography as well? Because if you go outside of your own medium, you're less likely to fall into like tropes, or I don't want to say copying, because I think that's a bit of a cheap thing to say, but you can find inspiration that actually adds something new to the medium within that you're working.
Definitely, and I'm constantly. I love I still love painting. I'm still incredibly slow. I've not sped up over time, but that teaches you loads about color and how I like retouch and stuff like that, color palettes. There's so much inspiration in everything, and films as well, cinematographers. Like I think you said earlier that you listened to Roger Deakins' podcast.
Yeah.
Like you can learn so much about still photography from those guys and the way they light things and what they say about, color and emotion and how that feeds into it. Yeah. I mean, there's so many, there's so much inspiration in other art forms out there. That can totally play into your work. Yeah, I think you are limiting yourself if you're only looking at photographers, and not only that, photographers who shoot similar things to you and looking at other people's portraits. My journey, I never studied photography. I never even assisted another photographer, so I never learned directly off anyone. Everything I have learned has been through a quite grueling process of trial and error and making mistakes and, experimenting, trying stuff out, lighting wise, grading, all that kind of stuff. So I feel quite lucky in some ways that I wasn't really influenced in that way. I wasn't never really trying to copy anyone or emulate or stealing from anyone that I was sort of witnessing work. I just sort of found my, aesthetic or voice, as it were, through a long process of doing that. And I couldn't recommend that enough to people who are starting out, just to shoot and just try things and make mistakes and, experiment, basically.
I mean, one of the things that really stands out with your work is you photograph people of a huge caliber in a lot of cases, huge personalities, regardless of notoriety. And we'll move on to those particular individuals at some point. But at what point did you think that you wanted to photograph people? Because that's a big step for a lot of people in photography, because it's for a lot of men, surprisingly, it's kind of intimidating to go and ask to take pictures of people or to show an interest in that. That's quite a big barrier to get over. So what made you want to jump that barrier?
I had always been good with people. Just in life, I always felt I wasn't an academic person at all, but I always was able to communicate quite well with people, got on with people. I came from a very humble background up north, which is quite sort of disarming in some ways. I felt like, I could relate to a lot of people. So, and that really is like a lot of and it sounds like we'll get onto that as well, but I feel that is a lot of the battle with portraiture, is actually like connecting with someone.
Yeah.
There's so much sort of technical stuff that goes into a portrait, how it's lit and all that kind of stuff. But so much of what you get out of someone is that connection you have with them. And I always was just quite good with people, always got on with people from every walk of life. So that was kind of like, I never really gave it that much thought. I always knew that I wanted to work with people. I mean, I still shoot, I always have shot landscapes and projects and stuff like that, but that satisfies a slightly different side of me. I think, artistically, whereas like a portrait is a collaboration. And I love that collaboration between, you know, two people or, you know, photographer and multiple people. So yeah, it never really crossed my mind to do anything different. I'd never really considered it. I think I've just always loved people, always loved communicating with them, sharing stories, you know, learning from them as well, you know, hearing what they have to say and what their worldview. Like, it's one of my favorite things about this job is meeting someone who's completely different from you or from the other side of the world and having them teach you something. You know, it's really special.
I'm going to go on a complete sort of right angle turn here. And it's something I wanted to cover a little bit earlier, but I've been a little bit obsessed in the last sort of 20 episodes of this, regardless of if it's come up or not. It's come up in conversation either side of the recording line about cultural hubs and being English, and you're English. And I was born just shy of South London.
Right.
England tends to be, if you go outside of England and you say you're from England, people ask if you're from London. That's the only place they're aware of in England. It's despite being a small place, we seem to only have one city that anyone outside of England is aware of. And a lot of people in England who work in any kind of artistic means tend to say that they're from London, even if they're from Bristol or, you know, Essex or Devon or Sheffield. They'll all put London in their bio for some reason or another, I guess.
Yeah.
As someone that's from the north of England, and I think you're now located in London, do you think that with like the internet being available, and obviously we're seeing like award shows now being done online, and people can be where they are, they don't need to be in a cultural hub. Do you really feel like there's any need anymore for your New York, your Los Angeles, your London to be such a cultural hub?
I would say it totally depends on what you're shooting. Like, I work with a lot of like celebrities and work with people who are involved in entertainment, and those, you know, those sort of like media hubs are in those big places. So therefore the shoots are being organized in those places. So I would say, yes, it's still relevant. I think the landscape has changed now because, you know, we're not doing face-to-face meetings. We're not showing portfolios. You know, we're doing things over Zoom. Things are done even shot remotely sometimes. You know, and there is a shift for sure, but I still think that you're, you know, putting yourself in a much stronger position if you are in one of those hubs. And a lot of that, especially being a young photographer coming up, you know, through the ranks and finding a way, is being quite like reactive. You know, I felt like loads of jobs that I got were like last minute, like, can you come and fill in for this person? Or can you do this? This is happening this afternoon. Can you make it? It's going to be in wherever, in London. If you are in that city, you can do that and you can react quite quickly. So I think it does make a difference. It has changed slightly, but, you know, if someone shoots landscapes or still life, you know, I feel like if you're a still life photographer and you can have the products like shipped to you wherever you are, like you could be anywhere in the world. Yeah. You know, if you've got your own kit, so it really depends on what you do. It wouldn't really work for me. I think I would always have to be in one of those big cities that you mentioned. And again, if you're shooting fashion, you know, there are certain fashion capitals around the world where stuff happens. So you're always going to be sort of relatively limited if you're outside of that scene, as it were. But yeah, it really depends. But I think if you're a landscape photographer or a still life or a car photographer, then you can be anywhere.
I mean, you mentioned celebrities. I've mentioned big personalities. I didn't want to say celebrities. It seemed like I was plugging it. But now you've used the word, I can say it. So just to go through a little list here, because I find it fascinating. There's Charlie Hunman, Natalie Dormer, Rosamund Pike, Damian Lewis, John Cooper Clarke, the unbelievably popular at the moment, Anya Taylor-Joy. I always say Anya Joy Taylor, and I don't know why I do it, but Anya Taylor-Joy. Sir Ian McKellen, obviously enormous. The director, Steve McQueen. And as me and my wife actually sort of met and bonded over our love of horror films, and you photographed Rose McGowan of Scream fame. So that's a big step for me personally. I feel like I'm 1 degree away now.
Yeah.
The first time you photographed a celebrity, were there nerves? What was the experience like?
It was Sir Ian McKellen. He was In fact, he was the first actor, full stop, I'd ever photographed. because I started when I first moved to London, I shot almost exclusively in the music industry. So all my friends were in bands or managers or, session musicians or worked in radio. That was just my whole scene, my whole friendship group. So I just shot, music artists basically. And I shot from a couple of small magazines. There's a small magazine called Fiasco magazine. And I'd shot a load of music stuff for them. And then one day, the photo editor there said, how do you feel about shooting an actor? And I'd never really shot, people who weren't musicians before, but I was like, yeah, sure. That sounds cool. And they were like, it's Ian McKellen. And I was a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I think the first Lord of the Rings film was maybe like one of the first films I ever saw in a cinema. So like it really like made a big impact on me as a kid. But anyway, so yeah, I was like, of course, I'd love to shoot Ian McKellen. Big fan of him. Amazing face, like a real, dream sitter. It was when he was promoting the first Hobbit film,
Mm-hmm.
and which was probably about 10 years ago now, I think. But he was, because he's sort of so famous and he doesn't like doing press. He's able to sort of consolidate all of his press for a huge movie like that into 1 or 2 days, which basically means that he does a day or two where he gathers everyone together and journalists and photographers just basically queue up and have to, have their 5 minutes or whatever, 10 minutes to do a quick interview, take a few pictures, and it's like a conveyor belt. Very intimidating process. But I went down to, it was Limehouse in East London. He owns a pub down there, and he was basically doing everything out of this pub. So everyone was interviewing him, taking a picture in his pub. Very soulless process because everyone came out with the same picture. Yeah. And I met his publicist, who was my contact. So I was just down there by myself, I mean, by the way, the other publications were, The Observer, The Guardian, The Times. They're big heavyweight publications. And I was with this tiny sort of like art house indie magazine that had no money. I wasn't being paid for it. It was just for a credit only. And, I was really young. And I was certainly the least important person and the least important publication there, that day for sure. And I was also the last person. So I arrived there and met his publicist, who is a well-known big Hollywood publicist as well. And she said, look, he's sick of this today. He has done, 10 shoots and interviews. Everyone's asking the same question. He's really bored of it. So she was like, you need to be so quick, just a few minutes, get the shot and get out of there because he's not going to last. So I sat down with him, wasted all of those few minutes talking about like New Zealand and Middle Earth and just how his pub, and he had got like Gandalf staff in the pub, which is pretty amazing. So I was just like fanboying and wasted all that time. And he said, right, okay, my home is not far from here. So he's like, why don't we, like, I'm sick of being in this pub all day. Why don't we come down there? He lives by the Thames. And so we climbed down onto the beach, not far from his house. And we did the shoot on the beach by the Thames. And those like 5 minutes that I was allowed turned into like 2 hours. And
wow.
He was just
Wow.
So kind. And the thing was, he was sick of it. He was sick of doing shoots and interviews and stuff. But he also realized like how much of a big deal it was for me.
Yeah.
And what I think he just knew, what his only last 2 hours of the day, a little bit of extra effort, really was like a huge deal for me as a young, inexperienced photographer. So he ended up giving me this time, did absolutely everything. We took these amazing pictures on the beach. And they're some of my favorite portraits ever. I have actually printed one up in my house now. And that was a really like seminal moment for me because he was the first actor I'd ever shot and the first kind of big, global sort of celebrity. But it was such a springboard because after that, every actor wanted me to shoot them because they saw those pictures of Ian McKellen and they were like, wow, he looks amazing. What a great job he did. And it kind of, it was a catalyst for a lot of people having, being interested in hiring me, other publications, that kind of thing, other actors. His publicist, who now I've known for a decade and is a really good friend of mine. We've worked together, dozens and dozens of times over the years because she was so impressed with how I managed to charm in and work with him. So yeah, that was a really special story actually. So he was actually the first, and it was such a positive, fun experience that I'm so grateful for.
Well, something that's quite interesting about the list of people that you've got, and it's something that I just, obviously not being in the position that you're in to understand how it works out, but if you work with someone like Anya Taylor-Joy, who obviously at the moment we've had the Queen's Gambit era of lockdown where everyone watched it. I know her previously from The Witch, obviously, like I said, big horror fan. And she's someone who's just grown and grown in stature over the course of the last 12 months for sure. And obviously Emma as well. Does the success of what they're in sort of bounce back onto you because you photographed them previous to some things coming out? So you could photograph her. She's then in the next big movie or big TV series or big Netflix series or whatever. And do you then see like publicists paying more attention to you or magazines paying more attention to you purely from the knock-on effect of her success?
I think so, to some extent. There are certain sort of buzzy, people, and like you referenced the Queen's Gambit, which smashed loads of, records around the world and that kind of stuff. So there's an obvious sort of zeitgeisty interest in those kind of things, and that definitely puts your work on a bigger platform at that time. So I think that plays that certainly the sort of like editorial world, because that is built on, they're always trying to find, the sort of the new thing, or, if it's an established person, what the new fresh project is. So I think there's that kind of drive for what the latest thing is. So I think it plays. Yeah, I think it does play into that. But there's also, if you have a broad enough portfolio and clients that you've worked with, for a long time, I think that is less relevant. I think there's some people that I've seen, that know your work and know that you photographed someone, or you did a particular style shoot a few years ago. They might remember that, and that might be the motivating factor of why you get hired. So I don't think it's always you're the sort of the latest thing, but it's certainly, current personalities definitely play into it. And then, people reference those Ian shots that I took, a decade ago, and go, we want to do this. We want to do a shoot like this. So, there are sort of like timeless personalities like him that, always take sort of pride of place in your portfolio and always reference, going forward. So I think it's a combination, I think it's a combination of those things. Well,
you mentioned at the beginning about an interest in cinema, and obviously then you go on to photograph your first actor, and it's probably as good a first actor to photograph as possible. Is there like a thing in the back of your mind where you feel like you have to take images that look like they're cinematic stills to match the environment that people know them from? Or do you just try and push your own style into it?
No, I would say definitely not that. But not trying to recreate the look of their, film or anything like that. What you are doing is you are paying homage to like the photographic style of the publication or the client that you're shooting for. Mm-hmm. So you do alter your style slightly if you're shooting for one magazine versus another. They'll have a certain style, or they'll prefer studio shoots, or they'll prefer natural light shoots, and you kind of adapt to fit in with the world and the brand that magazine has created. And then simultaneously, you're also trying to shoot something that fits in with your own sort of aesthetic sensibilities and artistic vision. So I think those are the two dominating things. You're trying to shoot something that works for you and works for your portfolio, and is also going to fit in with what the client wants and is going to meet their brief, in the magazine, or, whoever they are, the movie studio, or, whatever. But I don't think unless it's specifically come as a sort of like brief from the client that they want it to look like the film that person's in, you would never naturally do that. because that's not the objective. The objective is for those magazines is to appeal to their readership. It's not to show you what the film is going to look like, So, and that's why you have, actresses who might be appearing in, a tiny indie movie, which is about, social realism set in somewhere, but in the magazine, they're wearing a huge frock, and it's all very glamorous and that kind of thing. They're there to appeal to the readership, if that makes sense.
Oh, 100%. And obviously shooting for big brands like Netflix, GQ, Vanity Fair, Dior. Obviously, like you just said, part of the skill set is understanding the aesthetic of those particular publications or companies, because you need to have the knowledge of what they're looking for and be able to apply it. In that sense, what's the skill set you have to carry to work with so many different styled brands and different celebrities and so on?
Well, there's the sort of technical side of it, which is just knowing your stuff about, camera formats, lenses, lighting, all that kind of thing. So there's all that side of it where you just have to work with those brands at that level. You do have to have a sort of a technical knowledge, which means that if they go, right, and we're going to do this shot and we're going to have someone hanging out of the window and we want it to look like this, that you can go, I know how to achieve that look, technically. So there's that side of things. And the second thing, it always goes back to that communication, working with people. It's like people who don't necessarily know much about photography, but they know about their product. They know about their audience. Like Netflix know who is watching their show. Like Dior know like who is buying their products and like what they're looking for. Is like being able to communicate with those people and their mood boards and that kind of thing, and interpret that in a way that you can actually shoot what they have in their minds. So a lot of it is just being good, again, with people and communication, not getting frustrated with people who aren't speaking the same sort of technical language, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a combination of those two things. You do need to know your stuff when it comes to, about lighting and stuff like that, because it's also to do with your environment, because they go, right, we love your work and we love the way that this is lit, but we want to do this on top of a mountain, or we want to do it underwater, or we want to do it in a desert. It's like how you actually then, like what tools and technical knowledge you bring to that environment, which is going to be able to recreate that look of your work that they liked, that was maybe a studio picture or something completely different. So yeah, you do need to have that sort of broad level of experience, which you get by just shooting over years and trying things and making mistakes and, learning from assistants even, just along the way, picking up little tips and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a combination of those things, a combination of being technically experienced and then just like good with people, because that's a huge part of it. And I really do think it's overlooked. Being someone that people want to work with is such a weapon in your business arsenal, and I think that really makes a big difference. If you're someone that's accommodating, you're hardworking, you deliver things on time, you go above and beyond. And sometimes that means as much as the final product that you're delivering.
Well, in that sense, what do they have to give you? And I know that for you, and I'm absolutely out of my depth talking about what it is that you do, but when I'm photographing someone, if there's other creatives involved, if there's stylists or makeup artists or whatever, when it actually comes down to it, when, rubber hits the road, it's you and the person you're photographing. And like you just said, that rapport is the most important part, because everything else can be perfect. That falls flat, then you've got nothing. But what does someone sitting for you, what's the ideal situation? What's the ideal person sitting for you? Not in terms of who are they, but what do they have to do for you, or what can they do for the shoot that helps you get the most out of what you do?
I think that what makes the best subject is someone who's like willing to actively collaborate with you. I think there are a lot of people who they submit to the process of, following direction. They're happy to be told what to do. And that's really good. If you've ever worked with someone who isn't happy being told what to do, it's a nightmare because they can't see what you're seeing. You're fighting against each other. It just doesn't work, and that is very, very rare. It's certainly in the world that I work in, because a lot of time the people who I'm photographing are just as experienced as me when it comes to being part of a photo shoot. They've worked with hundreds of photographers before. I've done hundreds of shoots before. There's a kind of common understanding of the way this works and the way we need to sort of conduct ourselves. But and that's great when people are happy to follow direction. But when people are willing to collaborate with you and go, how can we make this portrait the best or unique or different? People who should have ideas and suggest things or, want to help you develop it. I think those are the best ones that are open to actually being part of the process rather than just someone that sat there and you're kind of just, taking something from them. Like you're building something together. And I think it's that sort of common goal of like, we both want you and this image to look as good as possible. So like, let's work together. And it doesn't matter if they are a celebrity or a model or someone that you're, shooting for fun personally, like down the street, whatever, it's someone who's like, who is willing to collaborate with you, which makes the best sort of subject.
Well, I remember talking to pretty much my all-time favorite photographer a while back, and he spoke about matching energy. That it's if you've got someone that's more sarcastic or dour or nihilistic or whatever, and you come in and you're really bubbly and over the top, you're probably gonna have issues aligning and vice versa.
Yeah.
How much of that is down to, obviously, like you just said, because the experience goes both ways, and I think people forget that. If someone's been photographed hundreds and hundreds of times, they're incredibly experienced in being in front of a camera. Mm-hmm. And especially if there's someone that's in front of, a video camera and in front of a stills camera, often they really know what they're doing and they really know, how to get into that mindset.
Yeah.
Who is it that's supposed to match the energy to who? Because obviously there's two sets of experienced people there. Do you feel like it's always you that has to maneuver to the energy of the other person?
I think so. I think it sounds like a wonderful scenario that, and there are, of course, everyone is so different, aren't they? And there are some subjects which will do that. I would say, people who work in entertainment, so your actors, musicians, performers, that kind of thing. There's naturally a sort of a certain ego that I think that comes along with that territory of just being a sort of adored or celebrated person. And I think they're probably less likely to want to sort of like meet you in the middle, and it's down to you to sort of bridge that gap, because they're also just meeting like so many people when they're on these promotional runs for their movie or book or whatever or album, that it's kind of exhausting for them to be trying to connect with everyone, because they might be doing 2 shoots in a day or 5 shoots in a week or whatever. So I think it's more often like down to you to sort of like. But that guy's exactly right. It's about matching. It's not about this is my thing and I'm the bubbly guy or I'm the whatever guy. It's all about reading your subject and finding like that particular way that makes them tick, and that might be being quite quiet and like kind of leaving them alone and just being very quick and that kind of thing. Or it might be just, really having a long conversation before and getting to know them. It's always different. Some people, sometimes it's humor, sometimes it's, talking about shared interests. It's really about sort of finding that sort of middle ground where you connect. And then there's a bit of trust, I think. Then they'll go with you when you go, right, can we try this or can we do this shot? And if you haven't sort of set that up, that rapport, then you might not be able to go there.
Right.
But I think there's like this scale where you have that ego. And I think this is not just true of like, famous people or performers or people who work in entertainment, where at one end you have this kind of like ego, and I don't mean that in a bad way at all. It's just that kind of almost like self-confidence, being comfortable in your own skin, in your achievements and your ability, that kind of thing. And then the other end, there's this also like quite universal insecurity that comes along with having your picture taken, where like not many people like enjoy having their picture taken or like really like looking at a picture of themselves. And there's a kind of like natural sort of insecurity and anxiety that is bundled along. And that's on the other end of the scale. And it's just, and I'm much more interested in catering for that, is like finding out like what makes them uncomfortable or what they don't like. And then just, you know, meeting them there and going, it's all right. I'm on your side. I'm here to make you feel and look as good as possible. So if you trust me and do as I say, then we'll achieve that. And I think that's what, rather than catering to the other side, which is a lot of like ass kissing and like, I love your film and all that kind of stuff, which they hear like all the time, you know, from everyone, every journalist. And it can be quite a sort of fake process, I think, that, you know, everyone pretending to be your friend, whereas I'm not really there to be anyone's friend. Like I'm there to try and make them look as good as possible. And I think when they're on board with that, that's when, you know, it goes back to that collaboration where they'll go, okay, you know, this guy's like looking out for me here, you know?
Well, it puts me in mind of when they do those interviews where there's a movie coming out and they put a couple of stars on directors' chairs and then they just have like a conveyor belt of people come in and they ask their 3 or 4 questions and then they piss off and the next person comes in. And there's one when there was the promo for the movie Life, which had Jake Gyllenhaal and Ryan Reynolds, and they'd obviously been sat there all day. And you can tell that it's, especially for 2 guys like that, they're quite charismatic and they're sat together. So I imagine they even start to just have a little bit of fun with it. And the next person comes in and it's such an interesting moment because you get to see a genuine reaction from people that are very good at rehearsed reactions. And this lady comes in and her first question is, was this the best movie you've ever worked on? Because you got to wear socks the whole way through. Like you didn't have to wear shoes. You could just wear socks. And they both just explode with enthusiasm because they're like, yeah, that's the best part about it. It was so comfortable. And it's fascinating to see people that are so well trained at reacting almost get caught out by a real reaction. To stick with kind of what you're saying there, to stick kind of down the same line of setting that mood, how do you gauge it? Because obviously, if you're working in shorter sort of periods of time, where, like you said with Ian McKellen, obviously it worked out a lot better, but you were given a very small window. How do you figure out what the mood is there to even match it? And I guess
it's such a difficult question because there is that no answer to that. It's just that unknown quality where someone walks in a room and you can feel they're having a bad day, or you can feel that they're, you know, in sort of game mode and or they're happy and they're up for it and they're up for collaborating, you know, you just get a feel for that very quickly, asking how someone is. I mean, like I said before, and a bit like you're referencing that interview, like I'm not really that interested in asking them too much about the show because you're always going to get that sort of stock answer. Whereas like injecting a bit of like humor into things, like certainly like self-deprecation, you know, if you start on yourself, like there's nothing more sort of disarming than, you know, when you're like, oh, me, like just a loser sort of thing. Like, so, you know, I'm no threat to you here sort of thing. Like you're the big dog. Like people, those scenarios are quite sort of like humanizing, I think, when you're able just to sort of like have some fun or poke fun at them. You know, this is where you have to just read everything, you know, it's matching that energy really, because you might find you get a feel for someone and they go like, I can be cheeky and like take the piss out of you. Yeah. And they really like that because they're so used to having their ass kicked that, you know, it's a different dynamic. And that common ground can be anything. It might be, and ideally it's not anything to do with what they're doing because they're not interested in my previous work either. You know, they've not like sat down. You know, occasionally people will, you know, look at your website or whatever and go, oh, you know, I really like your work. But certainly with the bigger the name, you know, like I say, they might have done 2-3 shoots that day. You know, they don't know you. So if you can just connect with them and talk about like what you had for lunch or, you know, something like that, they'll often find that so much more interesting than talking about like, oh, I've done this before. Like they don't care. And like often, you know, I might not care about what their latest film, you know, the common ground is that we're trying to, make something that, like, again, makes them look good, makes me look good as a photographer. And it's all about that, like, personal connection. You can find that anywhere. It can be quite a serious conversation. It can be, joking around, having fun. But unfortunately, there's no sort of like stock advice that you can give. You just have to, try and read the mood and be polite and respectful. And I often just put myself in their shoes. I hate having my picture taken. Like, I can't stand it. And I never get frustrated with people that feel self-conscious or nervous. I'll just talk to them for longer. I'll talk about how much I hate having my picture taken. And again, it's that kind of disarming thing where, like, I'm not here to take from you. I'm here to create something with you. And I think if you can establish that atmosphere, then you always get the best results out of people. And, like, it's very rare that someone who comes at the start is nervous and, doesn't want to give too much, that they're still like that at the end. Nearly always.
I can confirm for sure on your part that you're not keen on being on camera, because it's like, I think we double checked that about 3 times before we went ahead with this. And I think me and you both agree that podcasts that are on video are pretty terrible, but
hate that.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. One question I do have about this, because you've mentioned publicists being involved, magazines being involved, brands being involved. It feels like, obviously this is the nature of the job. You have to be very adaptable. At what point are you able, or are you asked to, or how does it work where the decision comes up between shooting digital and film?
Yeah, that's interesting, actually. Always depends on job by job. And it also depends on, again, going back to that the aesthetic of the magazine, the style of the magazine, that kind of thing, because some people actively request, can we shoot on film, or can we at least shoot some of it on film, which is great. I love shooting on film. Some people just don't genuinely understand, like, what it is really. I think people just, like, look at your work and go, we just want that, and we don't care how you get to that. We want it to look like this, or we want you to shoot like a contact shoot, or blah blah blah. So it's always different. Some people request it. Sometimes I have to really push for it. It also depends on, like, budgets and things like that. Is it something that they want to pay extra for? Because they've got film and processing costs, and it's slower as well. It's got to, with digital stuff, they're like, oh, the turnaround, the magazine has to come out like, in 3 days. And you're like, okay, cool. I can process that. I can send you shots, and I can retouch and get them sent back to you in that time, but not with film. So it really depends on lots of circumstances. I tend to try, if it's certainly an editorial shoot, I tend to try and shoot some film personally, even if they don't want that, the magazine don't want that. I'll try and shoot some stuff for me, like towards the end, maybe. Mm-hmm. But I would say there's only been a few shoots where I've really sort of, like, insisted and had to, like, fight for, like, this has to be shot on film. You referenced John Cooper Clarke on the list of people before. That was a shoot that I just knew had to be shot on black and white film. Yeah. And I had to, kind of fight for that. And, eventually they came around to it, and it was, I think we achieved the best results. But it's a real mixed bag. Some people, again, just don't care,
Is it the case that some of these publications and publicists and so on, is it the case that they are perhaps worried about not just the turnaround time, but the reliability? Because digital, you see it on the back of the camera, everyone knows what you're getting, everyone's on board. And film, especially, like, every day we move forwards, we move further and further away from when film was universally understood. And I think that the average, I don't like the word layman, but legally, I guess a layman, someone that just doesn't really work within that field, would just be kind of trepidatious about the idea that you could shoot off roll upon roll upon roll. They don't get to see it, and then they either don't like it or you get nothing from it.
Yeah, but I do think also people they just innately trust you. If they see, like, loads of film up on your website and you've talked passionately about it and you sound like you're confident, I think people are just like, oh, he knows what he's doing. Like, he's not going to make a mistake. Which puts, like, or, it's not necessarily a mistake. It can be, anything. You can have a, leaky chamber on your camera, and, light leaks everywhere that have ruined an entire roll. Those kind of things that you don't know until, you develop the film. So I think that is a factor, but I also think if you're saying, yeah, we can shoot film, then they just assume that you're going to produce the goods. So it's just more pressure on you. That might be a part of it. I think people invariably want the film aesthetic, but they don't actually care about if you do it on film or not. I think as a photographer who shoots film and loves film, I often do shoots and I'll go, we've shot some digital stuff, and I'll go, right, we're now going to shoot this on film, hoping for some sort of like reverent, response. Be like, wow, like that's amazing. And most people are just like, cool, okay, like what are you waiting for? Like take the picture.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh shit, is the exposure right? Are we, have I thought about this properly? So I think most people don't care that much. There are certain like film geeky people, and sometimes it's really nice when you meet a subject you're shooting and goes that knows a bit about it, or goes, I've got an old medium format camera, I shoot this, and you can have a bit of a geeky conversation about it, as it, like a pastime of theirs. But most people, I'd say, don't care. They just go, what does it look like? Oh, and even if it's digital, like we want it to look like film, and that's fine. You can achieve that with how you shoot and how you post, edit it, all that kind of stuff. So it's a mixed bag, with film. I'm not like a real, I'm not really precious about it. People are like, no, it has to be digital or it has to be film. That's fine. I'm a gun for hire.
Well, I mean, one thing that I think everyone would take away from listening to you on this is you're a very positive person. And I think it stands out even more when it's contrasted against someone like me.
Yeah.
I have a very dour tone. You're a very optimistic person. It's something I'm supremely jealous of. It's in my genes to be miserable.
Yeah.
But with yourself, you're supremely optimistic. And I hate the word success because I think people view other people's quote unquote success completely wrong. You could have a goal in mind that people aren't even aware of. And if you haven't completed that goal, no matter what you've done that they want to do, you haven't found your own success. So I don't want to put success in your terms, but from an outside perspective, you've had tremendous success in terms of the quality of your images and the stature of the people that you're photographing, the brands that you photographed for. And I throw your website at a lot of people in the last few weeks to get feedback on, the fact that we're doing a podcast, what they think. And sometimes when I do that with other guests, there can be a bit of a mixed bag response. With yourself, it seems to be pretty universal that everyone's pressuring me into getting this podcast done as quickly as possible.
Right. Okay.
When it comes to the perceived success on yourself from the outside, do you still live with sort of self-doubt walking into shoots?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. With all those things, because you never know. You always think that, you can be as well prepared as possible, but you are only like that one shoot away from having that disaster where your film all gets destroyed, or you meet someone that you just, cannot, as much as you try, you cannot get along with, and it's a disaster, or you piss someone off or you don't deliver, that kind of thing. Touch wood, I've not really had any of those. But you're always thinking that could happen. I tend to think quite positively, but in the back of my head, it's like, hope for the best, but you're sort of like also preparing for the worst. You can never be. And I think complacency is like death of, not only just sort of creativity, but also just, business wise as well. You've got to stay on your feet. So yeah, absolutely. Still have a load, don't get me wrong. Like when you've done, coming up to like 1,000 shoots or whatever, then there's a level of you, which is like, a part of you, which is like, what you're doing technically, and things surprise you a lot less. But then it only takes, your hard drive to fail and something to happen, or to be unexpected weather storm where you're like, shit, I might actually not get what I promised to deliver here. So you're always, there's always that little kick of reality, like now and again, that keeps you on your toes and keeps you making sure that you're as prepared as possible. And like you said, success is all relative. There are people, it's all about what your specific goals are. And like, I don't really deem myself to be hugely, successful. But I'm also someone who never really tends to look back. I never really look at my old work, apart from Ian McKellen, who's up on the wall. but, I'm always looking forward. I'm looking to the next thing. How can I improve? What can I do? What that's going to push me? And so, yeah. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think it's just being a human being. I think if you go into it thinking like, I know what I'm doing now and I can't get any better, or like nothing scares me, I think you need to do something else.
Yeah, that's like a sign of fatigue, right? That you're like mentally fatigued with doing it at all.
Yeah, no, exactly. You've got to be like pushing yourself and finding new things, or just trying things to switch it up. If I see a lot of photographers, and I've never fully understood that. There's a lot of photographers I know who take, albeit very beautiful imagery, but like the same images over and over again, whether it is the same subject matter or the same person, but in the same background, the same lighting, that kind of thing. And people clearly want that because they're buying into that. But I just think for you as a photographer, that must be so boring. I'm always trying to sort of switch up the way I do things. I always sort of maintain my own style, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
But just finding interesting in different ways. And that might be like trying out a different film camera I've never used before, or like, trying out different color palettes or working with different lighting, that kind of thing, while staying true to my own style. But you're always on your feet. You've always got to stay on your toes and just be, be careful that you're not being complacent, basically.
Well, speaking of kind of maintaining a style, something we haven't even touched upon yet is the fact that you don't just photograph people, you do photograph across different genres. And I think that I've finally figured out my problem with doing this. I'm appalling at photographing outside of what I'm used to. And I think what it comes down to is I always think that I have to put on almost like a different figurative hat. And like today I'm a landscape photographer, or today I'm a street photographer, as opposed to just, I'm going to go and photograph this thing and I'm going to impart my personality on it, regardless of whether it's defined as this genre or that genre by a camera club or a magazine.
Yeah.
When it comes to yours, I very rarely do you see people that are able to maintain an identity across multiple genres. And there'll be people right now that tend to send me messages after a podcast complaining that will be saying that I have said this previously. Well, it's because I tend to find and seek out people that are able to do that. And if they're not able to do that, I probably won't bring it up as a subject in a podcast. But with yourself, you're incredibly adept at maintaining this identity across, different genres and different styles and so on.
Yeah.
What's the secret to you of making sure that an image is your image as opposed to you interpreting something as as the landscape version of yourself or the portrait version of yourself?
Yeah, and I feel like the majority of that comes in actually deciding if you're gonna, like, before you take the picture. It's not. I'm not someone who goes out and like snaps loads of. I never carry a camera around with me wherever I go. Everything I do is very sort of considered. Like I will have seen, a landscape or a building or something and be like, oh, I must come back here at a better time or a day when the light's going to be right. And so I think a lot of that creative process of making sure that it's like your style and your look is like deciding if that is your, the correct subject, as it were. If it's a landscape, that building or, the color of that sky sort of fitting with the palettes that I like. So I think a lot of that comes before you actually take the picture.
Well, can I jump in there really quickly? Do you think that for you, that's something that you're deciding consciously, or do you feel like you have to train yourself to just go with your subconscious?
That's a good question. I think over time it becomes subconscious.
Right.
It's almost like when you walk past something or see something, or there's a particular kind of light where you just go, that's a photograph that I would take. And that's what I'm constantly asking myself. I'm saying, is this worth me getting my camera out? Is it worth me going home to get my camera? Or is it worth, we're on a shoot somewhere on location or something like that, and my camera's in a Pelly case, like in the back of a car or something like that. Is it worth me stopping, getting out, doing that? And most of the time, no. And that's why I sort of like try almost take as few pictures as possible, because I'm all about the like quality and sort of distilling down, asking myself, is this a portrait or a landscape that is, going to fit into my portfolio, because I'm not in the business of just snapping away and just going, right, yeah, let's try this and I'll decide later. They're very considered. If I take a landscape, I'll only take, maybe 3 or 4 images. But it will be exactly what I want it to be. So, I think it becomes subconscious over time. But that also, what I would always recommend to people who are still figuring that out. And if like you say, you're having problems with that, I would keep shooting lots of things and carry a camera and that kind of stuff, because that's how you train that sort of subconscious side of you. Mm-hmm. So I've only arrived at that from, many, many years of going through that process. Now I just know exactly what I like. And that's my part of it. So there's a creative process of sort of deciding whether that's going to fit in anyway. Then there's how you actually shoot it, and that might be that it's on the same camera or the same format or the same film, that kind of thing. And then post, I'm big into like color grading, that kind of thing. Those really draw sort of thematically things together.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of aesthetic where they work together. But yeah, I think it's a very hard one to answer, because so much of it is based on your just your instinct, really. Just your eye goes, yeah, that's the shot that I would take. So out comes the camera, sort of thing.
Yeah, 100%. And I think a lot of people, I've taught, small kind of beginners workshops for portraiture in the past. And I feel like a lot of people try and outsmart their own instinct, or they try and, I genuinely think one of the biggest problems actually that faces a lot of photographers, and it definitely is a male thing, is that they focus so much on impressing other photographers when that means literally nothing to impress another photographer. Yeah. They're never going to buy anything from you. They're never going to pay your bills. And,
I completely agree.
Most of the compliments you're going to get are going to be either, veiled compliments, to say the least, or they're going to be like what people are used to now as being feedback, which is where they just say something is either the greatest thing they've ever seen in their life, or you should kill yourself. But no one seems to be able to find that happy medium or say anything specific. They either hate something more than they've ever hated something, or they love it more than they've ever loved anything. And that's completely useless.
And I think people get bogged down in that world in like social media, specifically Instagram, like numbers of followers, like I should have more followers or this kind of thing. But it's about like the quality of the follower. It's like if you have someone who's going to be commissioning you and giving you work and they're following you, that's like a direct link into your portfolio. You don't need to chase them down to show them your latest work or email them or send them your portfolio. Like they're following you.
Yeah.
So, and it's very nice when, other photographers like your work and say nice things. Obviously, that's a very positive thing. But like you say, it's relatively meaningless because they are your competition. And to be fair, I don't actually, I was talking about it the other day with someone, is that I've realized as I've got older that I'm really not a great consumer of photography. I don't have lots of photography books. I don't go to before pre-pandemic, go to lots of galleries and things like that. It's not because I don't appreciate other people's work or think it's great. There are, far better photographers than me out there, and incredible people throughout history have taken amazing pictures. But I just get such more of a kick out of creating myself than I do. I don't spend lots of time looking at other people's work. I don't really know. People ask me, "Oh, who's your favorite photographer?" It sounds weird, but I don't know that many other photographers. Right. Yeah, and I certainly not many of them are my friends or that kind of thing. I've never felt like I was part of a photographic community. Like my friends are people who do work in related, creative fields, film, that kind of stuff. But I don't really have many, friends or, close associates who are photographers. I don't talk about it a lot, which is this conversation is quite strange, because I feel like most of the time I'm trying not to talk about photography, just because I just don't want to bore people, because like I said before, I don't like gear. People are always like, what camera should I buy? And I'm like, it literally doesn't matter.
I mean, that's not a conversation about photography, though. That's a conversation about electronics.
Yeah, of course. But I'm not a great consumer. I don't look at other people's work, But it's funny because I do. We discussed this earlier about the sort of lateral art forms like film and paintings, and I do far more in those than I do with photography. I think it's partly because for some people it really helps to have that inspiration of like, oh wow, this photographer's done that. Whereas I don't think I do. I think I'm fairly confident in like what I do and what I like now. That I don't tend to sort of look to other photographers for that as much than I do to painting or cinema or, that kind of thing.
I've got to ask a question here it's a really hard one to approach. In fact, what was quite interesting is, so for a little bit of a behind the curtain way of how this podcast tends to go down, is I have a list of bullet points in front of me, and then I'm, listening to you while I'm trying to figure out the best segue from either the beginning or the end of what you're saying. And you have a special skill of exactly bridging two that are completely unbridgeable. So I'm not really sure which one to go down. I'll go down, because we're in the region of not photographing people. Let me ask you a question that I don't know how to ask. What's the deal with Trellick Tower?
That is a good question. I just fucking love that building. And it's it's not much more complex than that, unfortunately. I used to live like right next to it, so I used to see it every day. And there's just something about it which it looks incredibly cinematic at nighttime. I mean, I assume you've seen some of my images of them, which is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But it just has a presence. It's in Notting Hill for those people that haven't seen it near Goulburn Road. But there's no building around it that's anywhere near the same sort of size or stature. It was one of the first sort of social housing projects in London that have some sort of like social historical sort of presence as well. And I just, every time I walk past that, I was constantly amazed by its size. And I love that sort of brutalist, almost Soviet style of architecture. I really liked those sort of like hard lines, the sort of symmetry of it, the geometry of it. And there's something, it's a very well documented building. Lots of people take pictures. It's very sort of famous as a cultural sort of icon of that area. And I think I'm drawn to it in that way because there is something because it's so well known and people know exactly what it looks like and it's been photographed a lot. I think it's a real sort of benchmark of quality of your own work. If you can take an image and they go, wow, is that Trellick Tower? Right. How have you done that? Because it's something standard that people take pictures of their phones on. They know it very well. Whereas I think like if you're shooting a portrait in a studio and you've got all the bells and whistles of all the lighting and all the, hair and makeup artists and that kind of stuff, that's a slightly unknown world to people. They don't know how much of that is you, how much of that is the makeup artist has gone into that. They go, that looks great. But like, I've seen lots of other people doing that. Whereas if you have a picture of a building that is something that you walk past all the time and you've taken it in an interesting way, it just says a lot about you as a creative person, I think. And I think that's why I was drawn to shooting, aside from the fact that I lived right next to it and it was just a very obvious, nice subject matter to be photographing, all the time throughout because I shot the project every year, basically. I don't know. Sometimes it somehow shines a light on me it says a lot about me as a creative, I think, because the consistent thing is the building never changes. I can't give the building any instruction or, guidance or anything like that. It just stays there and is unaware. And it's about how I use my tools and how I pick my moment. Again, what I mentioned earlier about the landscape to go, that sky is perfect. I'm going to take this picture. So I think it says a lot about me as an artist, rather than, because, at the end of the day, if you are trekking out in, the mountains in Chile and there's, dawn and there's mist everywhere, like you can take that picture on a phone.
Yeah, 100%.
It's going to look great. And people are going to be like, you're a fantastic photographer. Whereas it's like, are you? Or were you in the right place at the right time? Whereas I've almost sort of turned down his head in a way and gone like, I'm going to pick the same building, which looks relatively like boring to most people, and then try and photograph it, try and say something about me in the times that I've chosen, the angles that I've chosen, the format, film, about that and tell a story of me with the building being the most consistent element of that.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, I mean, as someone that photographs weddings, something that is a constant, it's a mainstay of, regardless of if it's the same people, if you're in a different part of the country. You know, I've photographed weddings in North Scotland, in South Wales, North Wales, all over England. It's a constant thing where someone sees that you're a photographer. It's usually a guy in his 50s who's like an uncle, and he'll come over and he'll show me a phone picture of his last holiday, and he'll say, "Oh, you don't need a good camera anymore. You just need a phone."
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you also need the £5,000 round trip to go to the Faroe Islands, or, you know, to go to Argentina, or to go to the Maldives or whatever. You know, it's not, your phone's done very little work there. A lot of the work has been done by the subject. It's like photographing a very beautiful person and claiming that you somehow brought something out that really you've just taken a phone picture of something that's very beautiful.
Yeah.
I have no way of segueing this because, like I said, these two things can't be bridged. So this is going to be completely horrible.
Go on.
But as I've got someone that works in the industry, you photograph celebrities, you photograph actors and actresses and so on. There's been a huge, bizarre movement with retouching the last sort of 5 years, with sort of small groups of very angry people on Twitter pointing out how retouching has somehow set back a generation and caused lots and lots of problems. And I'm definitely loading this question because I do feel we're living in an age where people are blaming everyone else for anything that they're not happy with.
Right. I don't use Twitter, but tell me a bit more about this. What they think that, you know, they're sort of warping the imageries to make people look, you know, unrealistically beautiful. Is that what?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it's like, I mean, it's much more extreme than that. The way that it's talked, the sort of the manner in which they go about talking about it would make you think that retouchers are adding third arms, extra eyes, extra boobs,
right.
You know, all kinds of ridiculous, like beyond human sort of parts. When in actual fact, it's, you know, great makeup artists, great lighting, great photographers, and incredibly good looking people who have got to where they are because they're the absolute opposite of being offensive to look at when you're watching a movie or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There seems to be this idea that retouching is basically causing people to have no ability to have self-confidence. I actually think that rather than, and I'm definitely just putting this in for my own value here, but I think it's about time we started teaching people to stop looking for everyone else to validate them and rather teach people to just like themselves, because it's a fruitless endeavor to make everyone else feel like shit so that you feel better. But my little rant aside, have you noticed any changes in the way that you're being asked to retouch? Do you work with a retoucher? Do you do your own?
I retouch most of my own work, and unless for certain sort of, you know, big commercial advertising, you know, and it's a big like comp job, or things are being shot all over the place and they have to be sort of stitched together, all that sort of like very technical stuff. I don't tend to do that, but the majority of stuff I do my own retouching, and that's mainly just out of, you know, that it's an integral part of my creative process. It's like really how you like tie everything together. And to that note, I will say one thing that does bother me is that when you say retouching, people think that means like augmenting skin, like you say, like making changes to someone's physical bit, whereas retouching is like how it's like adding grain and like playing with like dodging and burning and like bringing down highlights in the background, getting rid of little objects. It's color grading. It's the whole thing. We call it retouching, but I think people who are slightly less informed make that all about like
less informed but a lot louder.
Yeah, like they make it about human, like beauty, where it's like retouching is just it's like it's the same as when you watch a film. Like you want to watch the like scenes individually. You want to see them like cut together, and you want it to miss out the bit where they like fluff the line, and you're going on to the next part, because that's you're accessing like a greater emotional experience by editing in that way. And it's the same thing. If you have a photograph and there's a traffic cone in the background of it, like I would retouch that out, because it doesn't belong there. It's not supposed to be there. Obviously, in an ideal world, you'll be able to move that, before. So you're doing things properly and in camera. But if you can't, that's fine, and that's creating a greater emotional impact, making that image look better. And I'm a huge fan of that. I would never apologize to anyone. I completely understand what people are saying about, making people look unrealistic or, that kind of thing. But people don't realize, and you touched on it then, is that how much of that is done, like in the sort of preparation before. And having someone there, like my job as a photographer, like I said before, is to make someone look, a portrait, make them look as good as possible. That is my job.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to advise them and direct them to sit slightly differently because it makes them look better, or is more comfortable for them, so then therefore they look better, then I will do that. There's no point in being so sort of reality centric that you're just like, I have to portray the truth here, because like we're artists, we're storytellers, we're trying to present to the world, our own vision and the concept of the shoot. And, people don't hang around wearing like massive dresses at home with their hair done like that.
Yeah.
It's theatre, we're playing dress up and we're trying to make that as beautiful as possible.
I mean, there's so many issues within it, to be honest, with the way that we're kind of conducting. And I say we, again, I'm talking about those 7 people on Twitter that cut their own hair and get very angry at everyone else. But there's a few things that really stand out to me. One is, like you said, the complete lack of vocabulary when it comes to what retouching is. They haven't done their due diligence, but they want to speak on behalf of the people that are doing the work, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I think that we need to get out of this idea that it's bad to aspire. Like when I see Men's Fitness magazine, not that I buy it because I'm fat, but when I see Men's Fitness magazine, or if I see a celebrity in a movie, like I see an actor in a movie, a male actor, I want him to be something to aspire to. I want him to be good at acting. I want him to be good looking. I want the image to look wonderful. I want the lighting to be perfect and so on.
Yeah.
To perfect for the scenario, not perfect in the sense of just making someone look good. And and the last thing I'd say is that if we're going, like you said, the lack of understanding of what retouching is, if you go after retouching as being the problem for why, let's say, Ryan Reynolds is so good looking, well, once you take the retouching away, the guy's still pretty damn good looking. So what's next? Do we get angry at the way people light stuff? Do we get angry at the way people use lenses? It just seems to be a fruitless endeavor. And again, I don't understand why people that, like yourself, that create these images get. And obviously, thank God you don't have Twitter. Just avoid it like the plague. It's the worst thing on earth. It's the second most evil thing ever invented. But they want to attack people like yourself for creating these images. Yet, why not focus on the real problem of making people just feel happy within themselves? Let them aspire. Let them, a little bit of jealousy doesn't hurt anybody because it gives you something to work for. I see I see your work. I'm incredibly jealous of the work that you've done. And it makes me want to try harder and get better at what I do, not ruin what you have so that I feel better about myself. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, completely. And also, there are so many different kinds of photography and so many different worlds that those photographs exist. There are people out there who shoot like social stories of people they meet on the street, warts and all, exactly as you see them, not trying to be anything or anything different. And they're beautiful. And they are, like, they tell amazing stories and they say lots of things about those people. But, I don't do that. I think people who do that are fantastic photographers and that's a very vital thing, and they're not retouching their work at all, maybe not even like color correcting or anything. They just want it to be that. But there are also people, which I fall into a little bit, where we're trying to create a feeling, a world, something that isn't, reality. Reality, like, sometimes can be quite boring, and we're trying to do something that's taking you outside of that. And like you say, making something aspirational, or, if you're working for, and that's the whole essence of commercial work and advertising, is like you're selling people, a feeling, an image, a style that is aspirational, because the clients who are hiring you, which are paying our rent and our mortgage as photographers, so we need to respect that, is that they know what their market wants and they want it to look a certain way. And, that is people looking the best they can be, then you have to do that. That's just part of it. And don't get me wrong, I would stand with any person that said, if there was, evidence that someone had really sort of augmented digitally someone's appearance that was like, actively misleading, of course, like I think we have a responsibility to, treat, to go with the philosophy of like, if it can be fixed on the day, if you have an amazing makeup artist that can cover up a spot or something like that, or a hair that's fallen out of place, then those things are all absolutely fair game. There's nothing wrong with that at all. You're trying to present the absolute best version of someone that you're photographing. So yeah, I do. I think there is a responsibility, but it's nowhere near as of a big deal.
Well, I think that the way that it's referenced as being a huge detriment by some people to sort of society. I think, a little bit of perspective. 100 years ago, people weren't living as long by anywhere near as much. And now it's great to have all of these different forms of media and all of these different people that are willing to give up their personal life to be able to pursue a career professionally. Because, you look at someone like Daniel Day-Lewis, he manages just about to be someone that everyone seems to have heard of, but you never hear about his personal life. But for most people, they don't even have that option. We're seeing the horrible stuff that's been done to people like Britney Spears over the years, where they've just wanted to have, a career, and somehow that means they have to sell every other part of who they are to the general public. But, we live 70, 80 years in good cases. And my wife runs a care home, and there are people there living to 115 years old. You need something to occupy your time and something to take you out of reality every once in a while, because like you said, on a good day, reality is boring. And on a bad day, there's another world event going on that everyone needs to be scared of.
And it would be really different if that was the only photography that was out there. And everyone was sold this idea that you had to be perfect, and everyone wears dresses and it's glamorous and it looks perfect and suave and handsome, that kind of thing. But there are so many people out there now on social media who are, like influencers or, famous people who are like all different shapes and sizes and from different backgrounds and all that kind of thing, that there's so much representation that people can see. It's not like we're saying like, you have to look like this, you have to look like a movie star. There are so many people out there who are amazing and talented who don't look like stereotypical movie stars. And they do look very interesting in their own way, or they embrace that reality. Yeah. And that's really good. And I think it's good that we don't, shame anyone that's trying to be their sort of authentic self and the way they're expressing themselves, but we also don't shame people who are, doing what, I do, or the photographers who are shooting for these magazines, who are shooting aspirational, beautiful imagery. That's, I'm in the business of making art, and whether that is a landscape or is a portrait, I want it to look as good as possible,
Yeah. I'll call something like a body positivity movement or anything like that a positive thing, provided that it's not hinged on the idea that you have to punish someone else. You can.
No, of course.
This is the one thing I think we've completely lost sight of, and this is getting awfully deep, and I don't want to ruin you for here. But to me, it feels like we seem to have got to a point where we're incapable of uplifting one person without it having to be at the expense of someone else. And I'd just like to see us celebrate things a little bit more. I mean, we are right now, we're in a golden age of cinema, and I don't think we realize it. I think a lot of people, because they're so focused on stuff that I'm not a fan of, like the Marvel movies, that a lot of people don't realize how much stuff is being done outside of that, no pun intended, outside of that universe, that there's just some phenomenal films being made. And, just celebrate the art form. And if you want to pay someone a compliment, it doesn't have to be at someone else's expense. And if you don't like something, turn it off and watch something else. And, use that 70, 80 years that you've got for good, rather than just to make yourself miserable and make everyone else around you realize it. Now that I've completely killed the mood of this, I do apologize.
No, I think it makes complete sense. And I think you're saying, if you don't like Marvel movies because you think they're like not realistic, or, they're ruining cinema or whatever, like you say, either turn it off, or better still, go out there and make a film.
Exactly.
Which represents the values that you have and is the kind of story that you have. Or if you're a photographer, go and take those pictures that you think are missing. And that's like one of the most beautiful things. There are so many people who are doing that, who are offering different perspectives on what they think is missing out there in the world. And they're sending out their own messages. Like, we're a much richer society when we all do our own thing, and we have our own voice, and we take that out to the world, than, listen to the mob who say, well, you can't do this, you can't do that because of this, those people should, go out and shoot stuff that, means a lot to them, and the message that they want to send out there,
Completely. Now, the most annoying question, we spoke earlier about you talking to celebrities that get sick of being asked the same question over and over again. And I can't imagine you haven't been asked this question. It's the last question, and I promise I'll let you get on with your life and not have to listen to me.
Go on.
But you photographed some huge names. Obviously, I'm still kind of a little bit irritated that your first actor was Sir Ian McKellen. I feel like that's
annoying, isn't it?
It makes you very unlikable in that sense, I have to say.
Yeah,
it's terrible.
Sorry about that. Yeah. But, after then, that was the first one, and I've photographed all manner of difficult, awkward, much lesser known people. So I have done some time in the trenches after that, but that was a very magical start, shall we say.
Okay, 2 questions. I promise I want to let you go. I understand that I've taken up too much of your time. First question, because you've just brought it up. What's the like most awkward or difficult shoot? You obviously don't have to drop any names or anything stupid like that, but what's the situation that's just been like dire for you to get shots from?
There is one, which is a story I think I may need to tell you off air, if that's okay.
Okay.
But just because I don't want to name any names and that kind of thing. But I do have a story of someone I met who was one of the most rude and disrespectful people I've ever met.
Right.
And I should say that is exceptionally rare. I think that's a question that I get asked a lot. People go, "Oh, who's the best person and who's the worst person?" And I really don't have many horror stories, because most of the time people are very respectful, and they're there because, people are there because they're selling something, and they want that to be, they want to make sure the magazines, they're making a good impression with the journalists, and the magazine like them, and that they're supporting their career so that the press don't pound them, and it's a very positive, collaborative environment. But there is one horror story I had, but I'm going to not share that now, unfortunately.
Well, to take the heat off you then, I do remember about 2 years ago being sent an actor by an agency to do headshots for, and the whole shoot was fantastic. He was very, very good in front of the camera, very chatty.
Yeah.
And right at the end of the shoot, as he's putting on his coat, we're all packed up. He's gone through some images. He's talked about what he liked, what he didn't like. And it's just all in all fantastic. He was recommending movies to me. It was just one of those shoots where you click. And right at the end, the last thing he said, I can't repeat it on air because I'll literally have the podcast taken off of me. But for the sake of context, I'm married to someone of Arabic descent. And the last sentence that he said before so you can probably guess where this is going, but the last thing he said was about how much he wasn't a fan of that type of person.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And I was like, Jesus, that is one way.
Knock the wind out of you where you're like, I thought I knew you.
Well, I just had no motivation to edit the photos.
Yeah.
Because it killed the whole, I hate the word, but it killed the vibe of the shoot. It killed the feeling I got from all of the positive photos that we got. Very bizarre situation. Anyway, my last question, in terms of a geometric thing, in terms of an aesthetic thing, not in terms of who you're a fan of, are there any celebrity faces that you'd love to photograph purely from an aesthetic point of view?
Oh, yeah, that is a good question. I think along the lines of the, Ian McKellen, the old legends, the people, the men and women who have been around for a long time, they're so well respected. I think, the sort of Al Pacinos of this world, Vivienne Westwood, those kind of people who are absolute legends. I find working with them fascinating, and there's a sort of timeless quality to those portraits. They're not people who will do crazy things and act up so much to camera. They can just sit there with really good lighting, and you can have a conversation with them, and you maybe only take a handful of photos, but there's something about those which are really, really special. So people like that, I mentioned it before, but my favorite shoot maybe ever was, as well as Ian, was John Cooper Clarke, who I'm just a massive fan of. Growing up, I was a huge fan of his poetry, and working with him, just such an old legend, just such an amazing face. those kind of shoots are really special for me. I love working with those people. So yeah, old legends, like my favorite subject, I'd say.
Well, it's been absolutely worth the wait. My goodness.
Wonderful, mate.
It's been fantastic. So this is the part that's the most important part. I'm trying to turn myself into a human algorithm so everyone likes what I like. So where can everyone go to find all of your work, your website, your Instagram, and so on?
Great. So my website is www.bypip.co.uk. So that's bypip.co.uk. And my Instagram handle is @bypip. And that's the only social media that I use. But yeah, find me on there and hit me up.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I can't tell you how much it means.
It's been an absolute pleasure, mate.
What you said, it makes it hard to believe, and why I lose my head. I just want the company of anyone. That's why I'm sleeping with the TV on. Do you still call my name sometimes in your dreams?